Hello, and welcome to Everyone Has a Story. I'm the guest host, Tertiary, and today we'll be joined with Katherine Darnstadt of Latent Design and Boombox. I had the pleasure of meeting Katherine via a mutual friend. Someone suggested that I reached out to her, and since then, it's been amazing. Katherine, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me, Terry.
Well, I want to start off, I know a lot of people may not be familiar with what you do in the city.
Yeah.
So I wanted to ask a little bit about some of your background.
Yeah.
So please, like academically,
right,
professionally, your passions.
Yeah.
Please fill in the guests that, the audience that may.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, a lot of people aren't familiar with even what my profession does on a daily basis. I mean, I'm an architect, so Latent Design is my architecture firm. I founded that back in 2010, so we're getting close to our 10-year anniversary here. Really focused that firm on working within the social impact and civic impact space, meaning we were really looking at how do we design spaces and places for social impact, justice, and equity, and also how do we look at ecosystems beyond the building itself that govern the built environment that we live in. You know, when we, especially in Chicago and many cities and urban environments, we live in dense urban environments. We understand architecture. We understand space mostly when it's not working for us. And so part of what Latent Design is doing is not only building buildings and public spaces, but also looking at how do we provide more access to the processes that go behind building our neighborhoods, our blocks, our cities. So within that, Latent Design, I've taught at a couple universities. So I taught at Northwestern University for a while. I was really fortunate to be able to teach up there in their innovation department. I currently teach at the School of the Art Institute, architecture I have an undergraduate architecture studio. So really supporting that next generation of architects that are coming out into the world. And how we met is a couple years ago, we won a proposal to work and develop micro retail pop-ups as part of a public space initiative with the city. And so that's how Boombox came to be. And so how I connect quite a bit with not only our clients and our peers is really looking at how do we design spaces to revitalize communities while we not only look at buildings that are there, but we also really got into how do we create new types of buildings that solve problems that we have in more affordable and different ways, and that's how kind of Boombox came to be.
And so you do a lot of research in those communities, so you're making sure like the vendors that would be there could kind of contribute to what's already going on there, or like expand on, make something better for the community basically.
Yeah, I mean, for a little bit of background on Boombox, so we take a shipping container and we upcycle it, use it as essentially the structural steel and frame for a new storefront space.
So you're recycling.
We're recycling. We say upcycling because we're making it going from one use and making it a better use, right? And
you definitely beautify it as well.
We definitely beautify it. When we try and transform it in such a way that you don't even know what it started with. Okay. And that's really the beauty of the power of design and what it can do. And really, so what we looked at is for many years in architecture and planning, you get this where you get a great team of people together, they try and tackle a problem like revitalizing a corridor, and you make a great plan, and that plan sits on a shelf. And it gets referenced, maybe every couple quarters, a year, and maybe a couple initiatives come out of that. But most of the time, it's a very high leap. And what we started to see is we heard the same thing across the city where we were working. How do we support our small businesses? How do we stop losing a population as the city gets more expensive? What do we do about our vacant storefronts, and how do we create pipelines to go into vacant storefronts and scaffold up some of these small businesses? We kept hearing that, and we really started to realize we don't design affordable solutions for that as architects. That's a problem we have as
it's
not
trying
only
to make it more up to date, which normally makes it more expensive.
There's needs for that as well, but there is a whole entire development ecosystem within the city that really doesn't focus on small. Right, we're a city of big shoulders. We can make no small plans. That's what Burnham says. It's probably engraved somewhere in City Hall too.
Right.
But when you look at who our organizations and who our neighborhoods are made by, and what gives them the personality and the culture, it's these micro enterprises. So those are buildings and businesses and organizations that make under $500,000 a year in gross revenue. Okay. So that could be an arts organization. That's definitely an artist. But it also could be an arts organization. It could be a business that sells cheesecakes, but it also could be a business with 5 employees.
Yeah.
Right? When you really look at the breadth of that, that's who's making the most revenue, but also employing the most people, but they're not pulling in 10 million. They're too small for Goldman Sachs. They're too small for a loan, but that's who our neighborhoods are made out of. And we weren't designing for them. And that was a failure. And so we had the idea for Boombox and kind of put it out into the world. We were fortunate that we were able to build the first prototype. The first prototype was totally illegal, meaning, and I'll tell you how.
Guerrilla warfare architecture.
Yeah, it was. It definitely was, because it was too small of a building. So in the building code and the zoning code, it was too small.
Oh, okay.
Right? In terms of business licensing, we didn't have a pop-up business license. We just got that license just launched, a week ago. But back then in 2014, when we had this idea, you couldn't even get a business license to really do this kind of pop-up with the businesses that we wanted to.
Because no one had kind of seen something like that
exactly.
in the space before, or in the city
in Chicago. It existed all over the world,
Yeah.
So it existed in New York, San Francisco, London, New Zealand, wherever you want to go. But it didn't exist in Chicago, and we tried to bring that model to Chicago, and that's why I say it was illegal, because we had to write new policy to make a 200 square foot building exist, which is, it's smaller than your garage, but people go in there. You had a concert out of one of them,
Yes, we did. Yes, we
how
did.
creative people see a space that could be a storefront, that could be a stage, that could really be a catalyst.
Fashion runway, any of that stuff,
We've had fashion shows. We've had a
yeah.
couple fashion shows out of them. It's phenomenal, and that is how we start to look at now. Is not only Latent Design is designing for equity is where we started, right? And maybe that might have been the naive place to start, because really it's how do we create the ecosystem for equity in the built environment, and that takes design, it takes construction, it takes development, it takes funding, and that's everything that we're starting to look at now and growing into in that kind of decade-long evolution.
So with you wanting to cater more towards the smaller businesses and some of the more impoverished communities, is that some of your background? Are you originally from Chicago and a little small impoverished community that's been ignored by the city a lot, and you were I graduate and I'm able to provide, you do what I want with my passion, but now I can't cater to the community I came from. Is that kind of where that comes from a little bit?
It's a couple things that I'll push back on. I don't know if that's the right word, impoverished on that one. I do think you see in Chicago and it's strategic disinvestment. There is just no other way to put
That's
it.
a much better way to put it,
It's really
they're being ignored purposefully.
It's a policy problem, and it's a math problem too. You could just follow that. So it's what do we do about that? I grew up in a family of entrepreneurs. My dad still has a business. My mom had a business. We just, that kind of work ethic is there of being around people who start things, maybe fail, but get back up again.
Yeah.
And, I started my own business because I got laid off during the recession. So I was in that entrepreneurial realm as well.
Yeah.
And then our clients were kind of in that same realm. So it wasn't like, even though I was born in Chicago, but grew up outside the city limits, but still in Cook County.
Yeah.
They want to get out of city taxes, but still kept the county taxes, right? I don't know if it was a
Gotta
good
work
plan.
smart, yeah.
I love they should have maybe moved to one more county out. I think what was interesting is that was always our client base as a firm, and that's who our friend base was. So, that's who my students are too.
Yeah, I was going to ask a little bit about that.
Yeah,
too.
I have students who have gone through architecture, and many architects that I know who have gone on, who have taken a side passion and made it something full time. And even those individuals, we weren't able to design something affordable for, before we made Boombox and before we made this new platform, right?
Okay.
And that's really where it's coming from. It's a desire to actually address a true need that I didn't think we were successfully doing as a whole before.
That's awesome. Well, to piggyback off some of what you just said, is there like a pipeline that you've kind of like not tentatively created, but kind of like encourage some of your students to like, hey, this is, while you should definitely look into doing something that you should, profit from, you should also look into something that can give back to the community that you're coming out of,
I think for architecture and design students and urban design students are incredibly focused in school about designing for equity. I think what starts to shift them away from it is the professional practice, because professional practice doesn't always focus on that, even though we have a really strong code of ethics of making equitable and ethical spaces. We look at that, sometimes we tack towards it, maybe towards the environmental standpoint, because we don't really have a lot of power in the building process to make it ethical or equitable space, because that comes way before we even design something, before we even get to a computer, before we even get to a concept or a mood board or however you want to call it. That starts in somebody's planning policy. Somebody's putting funding towards someone's allocating TIF, right? Someone's running for office, and those are steps that come way before the building. And so what I kind of challenge my students of is you need to know that process. Is actually, I had to learn that too. I knew how to design a building, but I really didn't know how they got policy. I didn't know how they got built in the other way. I knew where all of the materials went, all of the ductwork went, all of those pieces, which is complicated enough, but I really didn't know how the built environment happened. And that was part of my re-education that I had to go through, and that's something that I push my students to know as well.
Learning doesn't stop when you leave the classroom. That's something that's important. It's like you got to keep learning, especially if you're in another field and something that can constantly change. Like the policies for how that works can change at any given moment.
Right. And it's about looking at how do we invert power structures. We try and look at in our projects. We're trying to do that within our projects and create access and invert power structures. But sometimes we have to look internally within our discipline and understand where we stand in a larger picture and think about, do we have to invert structures there too? Yeah.
So what are some of your favorite experiences or like some of your favorite collaborations that have come out of Boombox and maybe
that's
just
the
like,
newest, right? That's like the side project that kind of grew into something else.
And Latent Design as as an architectural firm.
Right. I kind of, the joke is, so how, because there's the different companies that we have, so I kind of think about it like a turducken. So if you know how those are made, right? So the turkey part, it's a joke, but you'll get it after. The turkey part is Latent Design, is the architecture firm. That's a big umbrella, right? The duck part, we have construction, we have development, we have these other things, and then the chicken on the inside, that is the projects that come out of it. So that might be Boombox that can stand alone on its own, and that might be other projects that we've worked on. We're working on Activate Arts and Culture and Public Space, how we've collaborated as well. Other great projects that I adore. We were fortunate a couple of years ago to work with the YMCA up in Evanston, where we made a prototype for a maker and media lab for them in one of their 100-year-old space, so a true adaptive reuse of a historic structure on a very tight budget, but looking at how do you provide a space to provide services to a kind of like an age group that they were missing. So what does that look like from 3rd through 8th grade? Right, because when they really are critically analyzing the services and the audience and the people that they're serving and what the kind of available resources are.
Yeah.
What they found is that once kids hit high school, they really knew that they knew they were a photographer. They wanted to produce videography, things like that. But those were students that had access to those resources earlier.
Beforehand.
Right.
And that's something I think America needs to do as a whole. A lot of other countries allow students by the time they get to 8th grade to determine exactly what they want to do with their careers, because most people are already aware of what they want to do. They know what makes them happy by that point. And what their passions are. I think we should begin doing that more commonly.
And that's, I think, what came out of the YMCA was called the meta-media. So for that one, what was great, and meta stood for, instead of it being STEM, right, we changed the name to meta, so math, engineering, tech, and arts, you know, because no kid wants to walk into, like, STEM lab, right? Like, it's cool, like, working with it, but it's like we really had to change the name. We had to, you know, add the layers onto it and really look at, like, media of all kind. That could be from sewing to 3D printing to, you know, making your own public access TV show. Like, it could be anything, and we needed to have that kind of vessel for that to happen. But providing the tools and the equipment and the access and the expertise earlier and younger was critical, because there was a gap age there, especially as you start to go and grow throughout school. You know, you're getting to the age also, these preteen age, where you're getting different self-consciouses, different, you know, biases, all of a sudden different influences are coming on. So you have to kind of nurture and keep those passions and the curiosity and provide, you know, areas to try and fail, or try and say, like, hey, I did this program this week, but you know what, photography isn't for me. I'd rather do like the digital editing, right? And you know, I have access to the equipment to actually make that smart decision. So when I go to junior high or high school, I could really focus in on what programming I want to do.
And what better way to build confidence than to focus on something you're passionate about?
Exactly.
Right?
Exactly. Yeah.
So in doing providing some of the outlets for these smaller vendors and businesses, what are some of the challenges that you believe, like, because I know a lot of the vendors, not all of them, but some of them end up being Black and brown people or people of color. So what are some of the challenges that you think you've solved or helped solve, or like maybe help bring them aware of, like, there's a possibility to solve some of these issues, like that being for like maybe government or even like people, just the vendors themselves, to see like, okay, these were obstacles that I wasn't even aware of yet, but now I'm able to combat these obstacles by being in this smaller space?
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, in the kind of boombox and that micro retail realm, we've learned a lot over. You know, like, I don't sell anything. I don't sell anything directly to consumers. Providing design services is a very different kind of business to business or business to consumer process than someone's like trying to sell a book or a necklace or clothing, right? So I didn't have that skill set at all, you know, because there is a difference between selling a product versus selling a service in terms of how you talk to your audience, your customers, and market yourself. So we learned a lot from our vendors, and then in turn started to share some of those best practices that we were seeing with other vendors. So in terms of challenges, one was people were seeing us as experts before we actually were. Right? Because we did this amazing thing. We made something that didn't exist, and that's like a feat in and of itself. But then the programming that went into it, or the support that went into it, we were definitely woefully inadequate at first, because we don't operate the same way. Our business is very different. But over time, we've added these additional services, and now what we do best is really making these new pipelines and ecosystems. So what we're focusing on is, how do we take a successful vendor that went into the space and find them the right connections or a new platform that we've created to continue to scale and grow their business. And we've been fortunate to have several vendors who have gone into their own storefront spaces, so we could follow their growth, learn from that, see what worked for them, and then start to roll that into, you know, new advice, new expertise, new pathways for other vendors who are just as interested.
Awesome. So what do you think, as a woman of color in this realm of architectural design, what do you believe is one of the greatest benefits that you've been able to learn and give to other women that you've seen in your field? Like maybe students, maybe just other people you've ran into from meetings or gatherings or something like that, that you've been able to take away, that is something that one of those learning outside of the classroom type of deals?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I'm part of the 1% when it comes to my field, and I don't mean it as like I make a lot of money. It's mean that like in terms of
small marginal,
small,
not very.
it's
that's
really,
why when you initially told me like, oh yeah, I'm an architect, I was like, you're a what? I was like, I don't believe I've ever seen first of all, not too many women architects in general, and then like a woman of color that's an architect is a whole other story.
Right. So I mean, when you count up all the, not even just the women architects of color in the country, I mean, we don't even need to rent a really big room. I mean, we're only in like, maybe we're under like 800 or so women architects of color.
In the country?
Isn't that sad? That's rough.
Well, it's the same reason why how things are being presented in the country. Like why people aren't so vegetarian or vegan based, or why people don't know so much about marginalized people in general, just because that information is not presented to the to the country at large.
Right. And so that's some advocacy in school. Most of my classes are at least 50% women, at least 50% people of color, and I love that, and I see that, and that's who the students that I gravitate towards who want to take my class as well. And it's like, how do we continue to find them the right resources? Because you definitely have to push and make space for everyone. And I think you have to push a little bit more to keep the space for people of color in the industry as well. Because there's a lot of barriers to it. There's a lot of access barriers. There's a lot of continued education barriers. Architecture doesn't, even though we're held to this really high public opinion of that we are almost like an exclusive luxury service, it's not. Right? Because everyone lives in a building, so we're always making spaces, and we're actually much more accessible than people think, but our education is very expensive. And so when you think long term, and I talk to my students about this a lot, of like, let's think about what, you're gonna have some loans to pay off, so how do we really think about this in a smart way? And that's also in my academic position, is also pushing back at the academic institutions of how do we provide better skills and training and experience so that some of these students can come out, work for a couple years, and then go to grad school. Or maybe we just need to change the industry where you just don't need grad school, right? Because we kind of we all work and live in an environment where a bachelor's degree is basically a new GED, right? To walk an entry-level job, you have to walk in with a master's, and I think that's ridiculous personally. And it's a huge barrier to to many individuals across this country.
Most definitely.
And we see that in architecture as well. So that's kind of like one takeaway of life lessons, right? Because I was only able to start the firm because I had no debt. And I had no debt because I didn't go to grad school, because I got laid off during the recession. And it's kind of being debt free is really nice just in life, is kind of, but I could only do that because I didn't have something else hanging over my head. And so I take that to heart, as this is an experience that I know I benefited from, but I also hit the barriers of not being able to advance in a career because I don't have a master's or other things like that. So you hit real barriers and see where those obstacles are, and think about, well, I've been able to accomplish X, Y, and Z outside of, so I kind of like went around that barrier, but that's also a level of confidence and security, and that allowed me to propel forward, right? So I kind of want to be transparent and share those stories of my experiences, so we could kind of walk out of here and be able to feel more confident in the ideas and presentations, and understand pathways of moving an idea forward or moving a career forward in different ways.
All right. Well, we're going to take a brief break, and we'll be right back. Please come back to Everyone Has a Story on CAN-TV. I'm not sure if I take a break or not, I'm sorry. I just stayed like 10 seconds. Hello, and welcome back to Everyone Has a Story. I'm the guest host, Tertiary, and today we're joined with Katherine Darnstadt of Latent Design and Boombox. Katherine, thank you again for joining us.
Yeah, having a great time.
Yes, this is great. I'm like I said, there's a couple of questions I knew were going to come up in the middle of this conversation, but I definitely want to get to two more. What are some of the future plans that you have for Latent Design? That's
a tough question, because like we're getting that big milestone, like I'm getting to a decade in business, and like any business who makes it this long, like that's another like tiny percentage of businesses that make it this I've had a great time. I didn't even know it was, we were that old.
Getting to, you're just like sitting there and like, as I'm thinking about it, yeah, I have like now known you for like a good 3 or 4 years.
Yeah,
right?
exactly.
Yeah, that's
So looking at that is really what is, what are opportunities for growth?
Yeah.
What do we do as a firm, and what do I do as kind of a design leader in this realm? Do we stay as is? Do we bring on a partner? Do we sell? Do we merge? Do we just close? Like, that's okay too. You don't.
Yeah, it is. Yeah.
You don't have to do something until you
accomplished all
die.
your yeah,
right.
like if you've accomplished all your goals, I love. I don't know if you're familiar with Childish Gambino, but he actually said that as an artist because he's a filmmaker, but he's also multi-talented.
Right,
He's been
right.
doing music. And he said, "I'm done doing music," and everyone's like, "Wait, no, stop." He's like, "No, you don't have to do anything forever. Like, I did what I wanted to do with music. I'm done with it."
Right,
I
right.
think that's a good place to go to.
And I think there's also a real understanding of it at certain points. Like, I've accomplished as much as I can in this vehicle pathway, and we could still be successful. Because when I talk to my peers, like, hey, maybe I might close, and they're like, oh my God, you're dying. I was like, no, I'm not. I'm not. I'm okay. It's kind of hard to merge those together.
Yeah.
So it's like I'm trying to be really honest of, have we done as much as we can this way? Okay, cool. Now what if we try it here or this or a different way? Because if there's a goal, if the goal is always going to stay, how do we make an equitable city? I've been in the design realm for a decade. Then what does it look like if we're in development or we're in policy or we're in somewhere else? And what does it also look like when we have access to more tools, resources, and mentors, right? So I've gone in a position from, being an intern and being out of school and had mentors, and I still have mentors now.
Yeah.
Where I'm in a position of leadership, but sometimes even people who are perceived in positions of leadership still need mentors, still need to learn, still need access, and that's a very different type of maybe position I need to be in or provide resources for myself versus the firm versus the staff, different things we have to think of. So it's a big open question, and it's a long answer to your question because we're exploring everything.
Yeah.
Right? So I'm giving myself a year to figure that out, and hopefully that's enough time.
Yeah.
Because I think it's how do we continue to move forward to that end goal of equitable cities, of an equitable Chicago, right?
Yeah.
It's like, maybe it might apply to other cities, and we are working in other cities, but really the focus is within Chicago.
What are some of the other cities you're working in?
We've worked in Gary, Milwaukee, throughout, mainly in the Midwest is where we're working, looking at also Louisville. We're looking at an adaptive reuse of an old AME church down there that was part key within the civil rights movement as well. So how do you salvage an old building that doesn't have the same use anymore? The congregation has since moved on to another location, but it's a piece of history that you cannot, you cannot lose, right? And what are also the needs within a neighborhood? Yeah. So it's our projects are always exciting. We're working on everything from, creating the first kind of pop-up space prototype for the city. We just did a little park prototype, kit of parts, launched that in Chatham earlier a couple months ago, to working with the Mayo Clinic to rethink how they design their public spaces to be a city of wellness. Instead of a city where you go to when you're sick.
Yeah.
I mean, so we have amazing clients and amazing opportunities, so it's hard to walk away or from any of those, but sometimes you have to think about, we have to continue to evolve too.
Well, if you want to come over to Ohio, I'm originally from Ohio, so there's a lot of opportunity there.
I've worked in Cleveland before too.
There it is.
Yeah.
There it is, definitely.
Yeah.
Well, Katherine, thank you so much for joining us
Thank you,
today.
Terry.
I feel blessed that you're here, and thank you for tuning in to Everyone Has a Story. Once again, I'm the guest host, Tertiary of Wharton's Midwest, and you just joined us with Katherine Darnstadt of Latent Design and Boombox.
All right.
Thank you so much.